I'm Aveline Burson, and this is a digital presentation. In the United States today, there are over 2.2 million people in prison. According to the Prison Policy Initiative, there are 10.6 million jail admissions per year. That's enough people to fill buses lined bumper to bumper, all the way from New York to San Francisco. To try and visualize how many people that actually is, let's look at the jail admissions for just one day. Each dot represents a person. This isn't even close to 29,000 dots. And that's how many people are thrown into jail each day. These enormous numbers are recorded in articles written by Peter Wagner and Wendy Sawyer for the Prison Policy Initiative. CNN says that if prison and jail were compared to a city, based on population, they would be one of the largest cities in the US. With all of these numbers swirling around, it's easy for us to forget that prisoners have names, and they become numbers. 29,000 per day, 10.6 million per year. They become statistics instead of being real people. We forget that they have stories to tell. And we excuse this treatment by saying, well, these are murderers, thieves, drug lords. We allow our perception of prisoners to be guided by the world. But we as Christians should be the ones taking charge in changing our view of prisoners. They have stories that we can have the privilege of listening to. In this speech, I want to tell you a few stories of people that stepped into prisons to listen, but also stepped into prisons to remind prisoners of the value that they have. The people in these stories used art as a vessel to communicate truth and remind prisoners of their intrinsic value. So the point is not the art itself, but rather the artists, which are the prisoners, and the audience, which is us. Now, I know it may seem like I'm feeding into the stereotype of African American prisoners, but these men are some of the artists in the stories I'm going to tell you. And I wanted to depict an accurate representation of the artists, because I want you to see the people behind the art. Because in seeing the people behind the art, we give back prisoners a humanity and a dignity that their jail uniforms can sometimes strip away. In 2018, Martha Ackerman and Stephanie Siegel, who are connected with the Prison Fellowship, brought their restorative art program, which is called Create, New Beginnings, to Shakopee, a correctional facility for women in Minnesota. What this program does is it uses the walls of the prisons as canvases to paint murals that encourage and remind prisoners. Martha and Stephanie painted 3D shadow boxes with flowers inside them. These 3D shadow boxes symbolize that beauty is everywhere, even when it's behind glass, just like the women who were at the facility. Martha and Stephanie were also able to include the women in painting these murals by using a paint-by-number system. And when they were finished, the mural titled "Bloom Where You're Planted" moved the inmates and staff deeply. Martha and Stephanie also took Create New Beginnings to the California Institute for Women, where they used an art class to answer the question, what is forgiveness? Martha and Stephanie had the women write letters to whoever they were harboring bitterness towards. One woman wrote to her mom, quote, "I spent my entire life trying to gain her approval, while the whole time she was neglecting me. She introduced me to drugs at age 14, and my downside began from there." End quote. The women then tore up these letters, glued them onto new pieces of papers, and began to paint over them. They kept these paintings as reminders of their messy but beautiful journeys. Martha and Stephanie also took Create New Beginnings to Rikers, and what they painted there was described like this, quote, "3 painters laid out a 5-stage sequence. An incarcerated man who sheds his jumpsuit, dons a new garb as a businessman, picks up a briefcase and leaps into his future with a superhero cape flapping behind him." End quote. The Prison Fellowship. The men at Rikers were emotionally touched by this mural because it depicted freedom and new life that they could have. And it showed them that someone saw past their uniform, to who they were and to who they could be. A French artist named J.R. is also using art to listen and tell prisoner stories. JR went to a correctional facility in California, where he sat down and listened to the stories of the inmates, the officers, and even the victims. He then took pictures of them. Then JR worked with the officers and the inmates to cut these pictures into 36 feet long strips and glue them into a mural. It changed their lives. A guy named Barrett, who was involved with the project, said, quote, "As a direct result of JR's project here, I've seen men change their lives for the better. I think that the biggest misconception about people in prison is that we're somehow less than human and beyond helping. But we're not worthless. We have value, and we can change." End quote. Music is also allowing prisoners to tell the stories. The Marshall Project tells the story of Jason Naragaze. Jason was incarcerated for second-degree attempted murder and first-degree attempted burglary. He served 12 years in prison, and during that time, he began to learn to play the violin. Jason's 95-year-old father died, and although he was able to attend the funeral, Jason still had to work through his grief in jail. And that's when he turned back to his violin. Jason was able to compose music that poured out his grief and his own story. This is a piece that Jason composed called Under the Ice. Poetry is also giving prisoners expression. Quote, "I was born black, but told not to be proud. I went to school to learn, but was called dumb. I asked for a future, but was given a jail cell. When I spoke knowledge, they raised their guns. I'm not here to shed blood or raise war. I'm here to show you liberation." Brandon, who is a part of the Free Minds Book Club and Writing Workshop, wrote this poem after his time in prison. Poetry is giving a voice to the men that are a part of the Free Minds Book Club. It's allowing them to tell their stories of who they are. Now comes the time to ask the question, why? Why does it matter that we change our view of prisoners? Why should we listen to these stories or pay attention to this art? Why does it matter that we choose to see them as names and not just numbers? Because they're people. Because prisoners have worth and value too. When we listen to music or literature or art done by prisoners, done by people, it's powerful and it changes us. And so we see art done by prisoners and we cannot help but ascribe to them their dignity that has been taken away from them. Because we're no different from them. Not only that, but Jesus Christ died to release them from their bondage too. His sacrifice for us reminds us that we are no different from them. Without his blood, we too deserve the death penalty. We are murderers and thieves. God has done something so beautiful by sending his son to free us all. I have a friend who might have to go back to jail in a few months. And as I tell you these stories, I think about him. Now, to protect his identity, you can just call him Paul. Paul isn't just a number. He has a name. He's a person with value and worth. It's time for us to change our perspective. North Point Inside Out has the song that reminds me why we should seek to remind and remember who prisoners are and what Christ has done for them. Released from my chains, I'm a prisoner no more. My shame was a ransom he faithfully bore. He canceled my debt and he called me his friend. That's when death was arrested and my life began.